unofficial White House photographer, has had a pretty fascinating post-Obama public life. His photographs, which he posts on social media and Instagram, you probably have seen because they get thousands and thousands of likes. They become a kind of visual reminder of the insanity that we live through because he's constantly posting in response to the news. And he's showing what it was like when we had a president who was not this one. It was a person who I think it's fair to say was in so many ways, personality-wise, in every way the opposite, right? He was very self-controlled, disciplined, empathetic. And he turned some of those photos into a book. It's called Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents. It's coming out in paperback in October with new pictures. And joining me now, Pete Souza. Great to have you. Have a seat. So you started photographing Barack Obama the first day that he sworn in as a U.S. Senator when you were with the Chicago Tribune, right?
Yeah, I was based in D.C., working for the Tribune when he was elected to the Senate in 2004, and then joined up with him that first day that he was sworn in.
You know, you have these sort of images like this one where he's walking down the street and no one knows it's Barack Obama. It's interesting. You know, he had this. Obviously, he had a national profile because of that speech in the convention. But those sort of early years of him as a senator, he was not very far removed from being a guy that like took the car to the car wash and bought groceries.
He still had school loans.
Yeah,
you know, he still had school loans. This picture was on a trip to Russia. So this is a sidewalk in Red Square.
Oh, amazing.
And he's walking around Red Square and not a single person recognized him. And I was very conscious of that because I knew, you know, if he ever did become president, that this scene would never be repeated. I don't think he could go to Red Square now.
No. What was your impression of him those early years before he becomes president of the United States? His general sort of personality and how he carried himself?
Very laid back. For a photojournalist, was an amazing subject in that the presence of my camera, my presence taking pictures, did not bother him in the least. I mean, I use what I call a small footprint, meaning I'm not using a loud motor drive and I'm trying to be quiet about how I went about my business. But he was very unusual in just the presence of my camera not affecting him one way or the other.
Do you think that was something about the kind of person he was?
Yeah,
his sort of composure?
I think so.
How so?
I think it's probably being brought up in Hawaii. You know, people in Hawaii are, you know, he was born in Hawaii. I don't know if you knew that.
I forgot where we ended up on that whole thing.
You know, he's a laid-back guy. Still is.
You then started. You were photographing him for the Trib, and
right.
And then you went to work in the White House, second White House you'd worked in, and you got to see. You know, he's sworn in amidst just the world is falling apart, and you're there through all these moments of just unbelievable high stakes and stress.
Well, especially those first 2 years. You know, trying to get us out of what was, you know, the greatest recession since the Great Depression. And, you know, he's working every weekend. I mean, I was there every Saturday and Sunday. He had meetings with his economic team trying to figure out what levers he can push to try to right the economy. So, yeah, it was a very stressful time.
This is maybe one of the moments of maximum stress. It's also one of the most famous photographs, not just that you've taken, but I think in the modern era, honestly. This is the night that the Bin Laden raid happens. Tell us about what that was like to be in that room.
Well, we were in that room for 40 minutes. They were monitoring the raid as it happened in real time. People jammed into this little conference room right across from the main Situation Room because this is where the communications link had been set up. They did not know that the president wanted to be there while the raid was taking place. So it was sort of a little unexpected. He walked into the room. Brigadier General Webb, that you see seated at the head of the table, saw the President of the United States walked in, stood up to give up his chair. President Obama said to him, "You stay right where you are. You've got work to do. I'll just pull up a chair next to you," which is why he's seated where he is. I also like to point out to people that you've got the most important, powerful people in the executive branch of our government all in this room at the same time, and they're essentially powerless. There's nothing they can do to affect the outcome of what they're monitoring. It's up to those guys on the ground. They made their decision in the days and weeks before, and now it's up to those guys on the ground, and all they can do is watch.
What is it like? You had worked in the Reagan White House, and obviously you're used to this. You were a photojournalist, but you're in that room too.
Yeah.
All those people are in that room, and they're some of the most powerful people in the United States government. What is it like for you to be in that room? I guess, did you acclimate yourself so much to being in those situations that the stress didn't penetrate you?
Oh no, I was stressed. It was a stressful situation, and part of it was that room. There were so many people jammed into that room that I picked a corner and I couldn't really move at all. I can remember at one point my rear end hit a printer, and the printer started printing. And Bob Gates looked at me and just kind of smiled. These are sort of some images that are the kind of like the most intense ones. You see the president there, just like the stress, sort of aware. You can see it bearing down on him. But there's a lot of images you captured that show an extremely human side of the president, and also, I think, the historic nature, obviously, of the first black president. There's one photo that, again, I think has this kind of iconic view to it now. What's going on in that moment? So this is young Jacob Philadelphia. His dad worked for the Foreign Service, was leaving the White House. President Obama invited the family in for a family snapshot. And I think it was his mom, Jacob's mom, said, "Mr. President, Jacob has a question for you." Now imagine being 5 years old in the Oval Office, and your mom just said, "You're going to ask the President of the United States a question." And it was more like, "Mr. President, my friends say that my haircut is just like yours." And President Obama bent over and said, "Go ahead and touch it." And I got one frame and it was over.
That's it. That's the one.
One frame. And, I think the picture resonates for a couple of reasons. One, you got a 5-year-old African-American kid touching the head of the President of the United States that looks like him. But two, I think it tells you something about Barack Obama, that at the behest of a young kid, you would go ahead and bend over and let that kid touch your head. I'm quite certain that wouldn't happen today.
No.
Actually, I don't think we would want that to happen.
No, Lord knows what would happen. Part of your job is being very close to this individual and this couple. Michelle Obama's got a great memoir that she wrote. She talks about how hard it is, how hard it was for her, how hard it was for her family to go from private citizens to having the entirety of your life be public. And there's some amazing photos you've taken of the two of them, but these are very, there are a lot of very intimate moments that you are there to capture.
Yeah, this one in particular, this was an inauguration night, going from one inaugural ball to another. They're in a freight elevator, and I kind of like this picture because it shows what you're talking about. They're sharing this little private moment, but then you've got the staff and the Secret Service in the background trying not to
I like the side eye from the guy in the back.
But that is the nature of being in that position, and I think, I'm sure. Michelle talks about this. It's not easy to get used to always being in the public eye like that. But somehow they managed.
You clearly came to have a great, deep friendship with President Obama. What was the development of that relationship like? You're there all the time playing this role, and then you become friends.
I think part of it is it's like a professional friendship mostly. And I sort of like to say to people that I was there for all the different compartments of his life.
Right.
Family pictures, stressful moments in the Situation Room, economics meetings on the weekend. And so I knew all these emotions because I was in the room where it happened all the time. And I think that because of that, we have a bond that's never going to go away, because I knew exactly what he was experiencing from day to day.
It's so interesting, just as you say that, because it's such a strange job. There's so much compartmentalization, and there's one person his whole life who sees him in full at all moments. That's Pete Souza, right? Like the private person and the public person. You also did this. You were the deputy in Reagan's White House, and you got to see him up close as well. And from what I've heard of interviews of you, you thought highly of the president.
I mean, policy-wise, I wasn't necessarily aligned with him, but he was a decent human being, and to me, that's what mattered. I don't think. Like, I couldn't work for Trump because I don't respect him, and I just don't think he's a decent human being. But the Reagan that I saw respected the office of the presidency and respected other people.
I wanted to ask you about that this clip that came out of Reagan, calling these African diplomats in the UN monkeys.
Very disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people around him expressed surprise and they were upset.
I mean, it was during the Nixon administration, so it was many years before I knew him. I didn't see that at all when I was there. I did not know Reagan nearly as well as I knew President Obama, but I was in lots of private meetings, and I never saw that come out. So that was, but it was still disturbing to hear.
This is a picture. This final picture is a picture of our current President Donald Trump with President Barack Obama, 44 and 45 together, and it's I think snapped. This is during their one meeting in the transition. Is that right?
This is actually on Inauguration Day.
Oh, it's on Inauguration Day.
January 20th, 2017. And they were just about to leave the White House together to get in the limousine and drive up to the Capitol for the inauguration. And President Obama pulled the incoming president aside to brief him on a national security issue. And, there's not much confidence in the person on the left, I don't think.
Well, let me ask you this as a sort of final question. We watched you sort of develop over the course of the Trump administration. In the beginning, there's very sort of subtle jabs, the posting photos and something in the news. And
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, it's gotten less. I mean, it's clear where you stand on this president, and you seem like a fairly kind of retiring in the background sort of person in your nature. What is it that has sort of pushed you, nudged you to be more open and public about that?
It didn't take much. It didn't take much. I mean, to me, we have a president that lies to us all the time, that bullies other people. I think disrespects the office of the presidency, and that's what bothers me the most. I mean, I've said this before, where if Jeb Bush or John McCain or John Kasich or another Republican had become president, I wouldn't be doing this. Right. Because even though I would vehemently disagree with some of their policies, I think all of them would have respected the office and would respect other people.
Yeah. Pete Souza, everybody. The paperback of Shade is coming out on October 27th. A whole bunch of new photos. Thank you so much for being with me. Appreciate it. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.